You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Hello? Is that the famous astronomer, Sir Patrick Moore?
It is, very much so.
Any news on the space front?
Quite so. Elon Musk has just designed and developed 5 gigantic, state-of-the-art rocket ships. All members of Parliament, along with the American Senate, have first-class tickets aboard them, you see. They're told they're going to the moon.
Told? Where exactly are they going, Sir Patrick?
The new anomaly discovered recently astronomically. A huge black hole.
Welcome to Twin Souls. Twin Souls is brought to you in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network, your hosts Philip and Ronald Kinsella. Now today we have a very esteemed gentleman, James Thompson, an author and a ghostwriter, and his newly released book that's due out any time now, Worlds Without Number, is truly spectacular because James explores the UAP hypothesis, the alien theory, and we'll get into that when we talk with James. And also he's co-authored a book with his daughter called Britt Axton. And so look out for that. Well, anyway, hello, James. How are you?
Hello. How are you today?
We're fine, and we're glad that we've got you back on the show. This is the second time we've had you, and Ronnie's here as well.
Yes, I'm here to add my little input.
So James, we want to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you decided to, get involved in this topic of UFOs and aliens?
Sure. I grew up in an age when it was pretty openly discussed. You know, we had Star Trek on television, we had Lost in Space, and I admired little Will Robinson as a boy. And so I was always open to the idea of life on other planets. Plus, because of my religious background, I've mentioned before, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the tenets of our church, one of the portions of doctrine that makes us somewhat different than other churches, is our belief that God is the God of the entire universe and that he has created billions of planets just like this one, and that he peoples them with his own spirit offspring like us. So we believe that the universe is virtually teeming with human life just like us. So as I was growing up, I had these thoughts about what might be out there. Would we ever receive any contact? And there was a leader in our church who talked about a man who was a member of the local congregation who came to him after a long time, after decades, as a matter of fact, and counseled with him about a very close encounter he had had, not only with a craft, but with its occupants. And that intrigued me. And as I listened to the account, he talked about 2 men. One looked rather young, the other somewhat middle-aged, who came out of the craft, and they had discovered him accidentally. He was down in a little gold mine he was working at the time. And so their sensors didn't pick him up. So when he came out of the gold mine and up around the corner, they were astonished as they came down out of their craft, and they apologized profusely. They said, look, we have a strict non-interference policy, and we're sorry. Our scanners just didn't pick you up. And he explained where he'd been, and they said, oh, that's it. So for the next 2 hours, they had a nice conversation. They showed him around the ship. They showed him how their propulsion anti-gravity system worked, and they explained everything to the extent he was able to understand. I mean, the man barely knew what stainless steel was in 1940. And then as they explained their power acquisition and storage capacity and how it worked, they told him everything. And then at the end of the 2 hours, they said goodbye, and they offered that if he wanted to go along with them, he could. And he said, no, I'm getting married tomorrow, as a matter of fact. So they shook hands and went their separate ways. They explained that they are members of a culture that does visit Earth quite often. They sometimes live among us, and sometimes they give us a little nudge if we need a little help. But for the most part, they try not to interfere in any way. So armed with that account of somebody that I trusted, I went on what we call a 2-year mission in the church. And I went to northern Italy. And while there was talk of UFOs in the air around northern Italy at the time. And my missionary companion said to me one day, he said, James, I've got to tell you something that happened to me. And so he told me that just a couple of years prior to that, he had been walking a seeing eye dog for a friend out among new construction in the area. And as the dog stopped, he stopped and looked up to see what the dog was looking at. And right in front of him, hovering over a house, was a double-domed disc, about 40 feet, 50 feet wide or something. He said it was just hovering there, and all of a sudden it zoomed off to the right about 100 feet and stopped. And then it, just like a bullet, it shot back to its original position and just stayed there for a few seconds. And then it took off up into the sky. And he said it went so fast that within a second or less, it was completely out of sight. Now, that's about the speed of a bullet. So that was something for me to really contemplate. So that's how I got started thinking about these things, basically because I trusted the word of a couple of people who had had these very close encounters.
That's really incredible. And, I'm fascinated by the description and the experience that the gentleman had with the 2 males on board the ship.
While he was in the gold mine.
He was in the gold mine. And I think that's really incredible because you hear these levels of high strangeness. And I have always understood and believed that there are other people, other beings in the universe. But within your book, Worlds Without Number, you take a kind of different approach to this. Although you're very accepting of benevolent beings out there, your book tackles this in great detail, doesn't it?
Yes. As we begin to look at the phenomenon, what we used to call the UFO and alien visitor phenomenon, we start to see a pattern of abductions of humans on Earth. And when they are taken and examined aboard the ships for a couple of hours, it seems, we see a pattern emerge of high strangeness. It's not so much nuts and bolts, aircraft like we might expect it to be. Yeah. It seems to be more surreal, more of a spiritual encounter in many ways. As a matter of fact, the more you look at it, the deeper down the rabbit hole it appears to go, and the higher the strangeness levels seem to get. Not only do they do very strange things to humans in the way of examination, in the way of fertility experimentations and things, but they seem to say things and deliver messages that are internally inconsistent, that make no sense at any level, and that seem to be highly deceptive. In fact, almost everything about every encounter with a being that's not a normal human appears to be laden with deception. And that's something that I started noticing many years ago, and I started studying it. And that's really what got me interested, was because so many of these encounters with other beings parallel better encounters with demonic beings historically. And the more I looked into it, the more I found that is often true. Not always true. Again, I believe that if there are demonic experiences and encounters, they only mimic true encounters.
Yes, I actually on par with you with that, James, because in my book Digital Demon, we go down that route of the demonic aspect, the fallen angels, and I absolutely agree with you. The tricksters, as we call them now, people are referred to as tricksters, because certainly with my own personal encounter with the alleged doctors, which I now know they could not possibly have been, because they spoke the Queen's English and they rejected the Cheshire Cat, all the things you have stated that are unusual or highly suspicious, harping on about an operation, so I did, in their presence, feel that I was very uncomfortable. I was terrified, as a matter of fact, and they weren't right. There was something wrong about them. There was just something very strange, but I was too young to appreciate that at the time until I got older and realized there's something very nasty about that incident. So I absolutely agree with you on that. The demonic aspect of, and also it would tally with the so many infinite varied number of creatures reported, whereas this thing can manipulate and change matter accordingly and to preference.
Yeah, I think also James has got a very valid point there, because talking about the chap in the mine that met the two beings in the craft,
yes,
he didn't appear to be in any way frightened,
no,
or they were very accepting of him. And yet you're right. I think that what we're looking at, James, and you've quite rightfully pointed out, and as I agree with you, is some type of interdimensional theory with regards to a certain faction of so-called aliens that occasionally change faces.
We're talking about the
Greys,
the Dark Lord.
Yeah, the darker aspect. So tell us your thoughts on that, James.
Well, to the extent I have noticed that there are many of these creatures that present themselves in various guises at different times. Now, you may have a particular being who presents himself, and I say himself because those who come forward and do the abducting and do the interactions are usually projected as males. Although many of them keep the same appearance throughout multiple abduction experiences, we see that things around them, beings around them, tend to change and morph even before your very eyes at points. Even the surroundings tend to morph into from one thing to another. The wall may be 14 feet tall, then the next thing you know, it's only 6 feet tall, and it may be rounded or it may be squared, just depending on when you happen to look over at it. So whatever it is, it seems to be presenting almost a pageant. Some kind of stage play that's going on for the delivery of a message. And strangely, the message often has religious overtones. Now, there is absolutely no reason ever for beings to race at faster than light speeds across the universe, at least across our galaxy, only to deliver religious messages. And the religions that they appear to adhere to are more like our Eastern mystic religions. They talk a lot about reincarnation. They talk about ascended masters and ascended spirits, and how it's important for us to elevate our vibrational levels so that we can go to the next phase of meditation and those kinds of things. And it sounds very much like a false religious message being delivered, and especially when they start talking about the new galactic Messiah who's coming. They talk about Jesus Christ as though he was just one of the ascended masters who has gone on now to the next level, but that he was not the Messiah of the Hebrews. He was not the Savior of the Christians, but he was just one of many. But they are the ones who are going to introduce the true Messiah. Now, why would anyone go to the scientific effort to fly all the way here and deliver those kinds of absurd messages?
Yes. And also, James, it's very interesting because, through your research and through our research, I definitely sway towards the interdimensional hypothesis, and simply because there are telltale signs within the abduction phenomena. When I looked at it and taking into account certain near-death experiences that people have, when they pass or are passing from this realm into the next world, the world that they've left behind doesn't seem as real as the one that they're in. Now, if we compare that to the abduction phenomena, again, more times than not, people are taken through solid matter. They're taking into an area where the beings communicate to them telepathically, and there is a sense of timelessness. So, I think that, you're absolutely correct in terms of this. We have to look at the more uncomfortable area of, demonic entities, because a lot of people have patented it and packaged it as like Hollywood, here we are, spaceships, grey aliens and all the rest of it. And you're right, it changes, it morphs. That is very interesting.
Yes, and also, James, that would make sense because I've raised this issue before regarding the alleged interactions with these so-called godly spacemen from the 1950s and 60s when I researched the UFO subject myself. And as we have spoken before, I believe that they were trying to convince the abductees that atomic warfare was very dangerous and it had to be stopped. And I could never get my head around the fact that they're approaching non-governmental people with a message of such crucial significance. And yet they did nothing, because if this atomic possible war was to occur or an accident, they wouldn't hesitate to nullify all the weapons themselves. We will inevitably build more, which the military will do, and they do the same. So what can we do? Nothing. We're left scratching our heads. They would then have expressed their true benevolence by doing that, but they haven't. As you said, it's a deception, and yes, you're quite right in that respect.
Yes, this is something that you and I have discussed in private even. The fact that they deliver a message, they say it's of extreme importance. In fact, they say it not only affects what we do here, but it affects them in their realms as well. Therefore, it's of utmost importance that we change our ways. And as you say, they started out in the anti-atomic power movement. They were the original Stop the Nukes. And now it's gone on to our carbon footprint in the world and filling the world with carbon to the point that we have global warming coming. And they say that this is of great concern to them. And my answer is the same as yours. If it really mattered to them, they could very easily share with us technologies that would make pollution and the creation of extra carbon in our environment completely unnecessary. They could provide to us the types of technology that runs their craft, whatever it is. And we have an idea from the assertions that have been made. They could very easily share that technology with us, and we would no more have the problems that are creating these issues. Yet we have not received one iota of help from these beings, whoever they are. Apparently, that's just a sham. It's just just a subterfuge.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. I agree with you on that, James, absolutely, because you did state as well, you suggested to us that they even go further about the environmental issues, which they are now harping on about, and will do, as we know, absolutely nothing, because it's a deception. And it's funny. Many years ago, I would never have believed this. I'm not ignorant. It's just I think I was ignorant of the facts. Until you really look into this, and you like some others, they're scratching their head and thinking there's something very dark about all this. And it even moves into, when people state that what we've just spoken about, they say, well, it's because they're not allowed to intervene, but they're already doing just that. They're breaking that rule, so it's a contradiction. So you see these people who also state that they have knocked out a few of the nuclear silos or shut them down temporarily. That might be the case, but it is a deception, because if they were so concerned, they'd knock them all out. So yes, absolutely, James, absolutely.
So where do you think, James, from your perspective, you're a wonderful author. You've written quite a number of books, and you're a ghostwriter. You're an esteemed gentleman. I mean, within your thoughts, what do you think is going on here? What's the area of research that you're taking regarding the UAPs and the alien hypothesis?
Well, the Reader's Digest version for me is that there really are other humans and humanoids that live throughout the universe. Mm-hmm. Again, I think the universe is teeming with life. I've always thought that from a religious viewpoint. I couldn't always prove it scientifically, but since the publication of my first book, thousands of planets have been identified outside of our own solar system. So now even scientists are warming up to the idea of life on other planets. They still don't think that it's visited here because of the distances involved, and they don't believe that you can break the light speed barrier, which is understandable, but I just don't agree with them on that. Having said that, I think that if we are being visited occasionally by our space brothers, I don't think that is what is going on in the many encounters that we're experiencing every day. I worked the numbers one time, and at 7% of the world's population having seen what we term a UFO, well, just one sighting in a lifetime means that there are approximately 20,000 UFOs being viewed in a 24-hour period. And that puts our skies in gridlock with UFOs. Your own experience tells you that when you were able to look up and see, you saw the skies filled with UFOs. And so that causes us to wonder if they're always there and we're just not able to see them. And certainly the reports out of the U.S. Navy lately, as they upgraded their equipment, they started seeing things that they hadn't seen before. So that may very well be true. Yes. But I do think that because of the interactions and the deceptive nature of a lot of the encounters with beings from these craft, I think that a lot of them, they act demonic. They're deceptive. They are cold. They don't seem to really care anything about anybody. That says demonic to me. As you know, I've shared with you personally some of my personal experiences in that area. And I can tell you, demons hate humans. They do everything they can to overcome us and to destroy us. And I have a personal experience with that I can tell you for sure. There are demons, and they are extremely hateful of humanity.
Do you know, we'll hear that in a moment, James, because, when the report came out from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on the 25th of June of last year, they called it a preliminary assessment and identified aerial phenomena. Of course, they changed the acronym from UFO, which is less spacey now, to UAP, which is more scientific. But when you read the report, when you look at it, it tells you categorically that there is something that they do not wish to address. And I think that because of that, we have to take into consideration the military's viewpoint of why they're not saying, because this may open up a can of worms. And yes, there have also been, episodes where certain individuals, genuine individuals who have gone through an abduction, and when they have cried out in the name of Christ, in the name of God, then the energy or the force behind it seems to release them. And with regards to my own research, such as it is, definitely points towards this interdimensional hypothesis. And I think it's interesting to see, and you're right, that this force, this intelligence, does come across as very nefarious. It has no care or compassion, no empathy whatsoever, because when, I'm not going to go into it, but through my own experience, this is Philip, back in 1989, that was very horrifying to me. And although I've changed because of that, because I've survived the journey, and even to this day, if anyone says, oh, you imagined it or you dreamed it, I doubt very much that I'll be chasing a dream for 30 odd years. So it leaves a very strong mark upon your psyche. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we're looking at some kind of, could be looking at some kind of demonic intelligence. And you did tell us previously about this really amazing case with regards to demons that we would like for you to share, because I remembered that I had this cold feeling running up my spine when you said it.
Well, I'd be happy to repeat it. As you know, and as I told you the first time, I do not speak of these things lightly. And those of us who have been charged with the responsibility of priesthood power, we tend to keep things close to the vest, because we do not speak of these things very openly. But I'll just tell you the highlights of an experience that I had. I was administering a priesthood ordinance to a young woman who was having some difficulties, and we had not yet discerned the source of her difficulties. But as I began the ordinance, she looked at me and began to speak, and her voice was incapable of producing the sounds that she was making. If you've ever heard one of those voices in a demonic possession movie where there are 30 or 40 voices speaking at once, everything from deep basses to high pitch trills, and they all sound evil and demonic all at the same time. That's exactly what I heard coming from her throat as she spoke to me. And her words it began with, you men of the priesthood. And then she began to rail against those who do their best to represent God and to spread his love and care throughout the world. They expressed their hate of anybody who follows God in Jesus Christ. They expressed their hate of all humanity, and they named one by one. They named me. They named others in my life that they would seek to destroy. And believe me, I've seen a lot of negativity in my life, I think, as a direct result of that. But the overall message that I received from those demons who were speaking from her at the time in the voice of what I call the voice of Legion, they hate us. They absolutely want to do everything they can to destroy us, and destroy us physically, and to destroy us spiritually, and to keep us from fulfilling the plan of salvation that God has enacted in our behalf. We are his children. 1/3 of the hosts of heaven, all of his children, were cast out down to this earth, and they make up the demons that are here. And the rest of us come to earth one at a time, and we fulfill our destiny here, and then we go on to judgment. We go on to reward, whatever that might be. This 1/3 is a snarling mass of demonic terror that wants nothing more than to put the brakes on this plan of salvation that God has given us as a gift. And I have heard this from their own voice, from her own lips. And then when the episode was over, she went back to normal and had no idea what had just happened to her.
I can imagine the horror of actually being in the presence of the poor woman being used as a conduit for them to get their message across to you. I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all that there would be some kind of revenge on Satan or Lucifer's part being cast out and, soiling God's very plan of goodness.
I was going to say, it is very interesting to me, and I think that that so much of the alien abduction phenomenon seems to be centered in this concept of they need bodies. And as we talk about interdimensional beings and the possibilities that raise their hands in front of us, guess who it is that never got bodies and really would like to have them? It's these very same demonic beings. So when I hear that, person after person testifying that the beings that they interacted with were performing genetic experiments and were trying to get bodies to put their own people into, it makes me think, it's checking all the boxes. Maybe this is demonic.
Yeah, I think, James, you and I are completely on the same page, because where my research took me back in 1996, I was very curious about this alien reproductive program hybridization. And the greys that I understand cannot reproduce, and yet they are looking towards creating some form of new genus. And it had everything to do with the soul and with the dangers or inherent dangers of cloning. And this is the issues that I have argued and continue to piece together within my own research. But, what's really fascinating is that, yes, we have to look at this subject matter, look at all of the facts, because like you and like Ronnie and myself, I'm very open to all forms of speculation. But we have to go into those uncomfortable territories. And I get this really horrible feeling, James, because, I've always believed in a God, a Godhead, the goodness, the righteousness. I've even always believed in Christ. And one of the things that I find and is very much aware is I had also been involved in a case with a poltergeist, and I saw the poltergeist in action. Although I couldn't tell you what the poltergeist was, we still don't know. Trapped spirits, mischievous spirits, whatever you call them. I was there to see that. So if anyone says to me, like with you, that went through the experience of that poor lady that was possessed or temporarily overridden by some darker force, they exist.
Yes, they do. And I have a firm testimony within my heart of that. And as you say, we kind of don't want to go down those rabbit holes. We kind of don't want to find those kinds of things. But these phenomena, whatever they are, they drag us screaming into those realms. They're the ones who show us what they are and what they do and what interests them. And from my viewpoint, a friendly human from another planet saying, "Hey, brother, we're here to help. What can we do for you?" would have been great. But that's not what the phenomenon presents itself as at all.
There's also the horror of, as is well known through the respected Linda Moulton Howe. She's researched Catholic mutilation for over 40 years. She's a pioneer in that aspect. That adds a sinister element to it all, doesn't it? When we move along to things like Skinwalker Ranch and other hotspots where paranormal activity is rife, and it struck me and Philip, we spoke about this. We have mentioned it too, that is it possible that they're testing people, that is their testing ground, that people are trying to understand what the phenomena is, and I have all due respect for them because they're curious, they're scientists, but this force is poking and prodding them, respectfully put, seeing how they'll react to it. Is it possible that these are hot spots for education for them to see how we'd react to certain interactions? It goes on, doesn't it, James? For the darker forces, because they are dark. I mean, they saw a 6-foot-tall wolf, the family prior to Robert Bigelow, is it the tycoon who owned it?
Yeah.
There was, I believe, a 6-foot wolf who approached the family. Now, there's no such thing as a 6-foot wolf. It didn't harm the people, but then this nightmarish scenario exploded where it went for one of the calves, and they shot it and shot it. It did very little. In the end, they used quite a large rifle, but all it did was skip off. It ran off and disappeared. So it is possible that this demonic presence has created these kind of hotspots. Would you agree, to see how we'd react during its process of trying to transcend into the human way?
Well, I can't attribute purpose to it, but I agree that those things have been happening. There seem to be certain hot spots. Our Native American reservations seem to be centralized focal points for a lot of this activity. I'm not sure which came first, the activity or the natives.
Right.
But certainly that area of Skinwalker Ranch has a history of skinwalkers. That's why it's called that. I write in the book about skinwalkers and some people I know who have had very personal interaction with skinwalkers. And I'll just tell you this, more than one of them has related to me that as they drove across the reservations, young native men would chase them at speeds in excess of 60 miles an hour for several minutes at a time. And there are all kinds of things that go along with that, but that's completely inhuman, as you know. It's completely impossible for a human body to run at over 60 miles per hour for any length of time, let alone sustain it for several minutes. But yet I have people that I trust. One was a bishop in my church who, during his missionary service, encountered skinwalkers, and I've learned a lot about that. So in the area of Skinwalker Ranch, there are a number of things that happen. But some of the most interesting appear to be the portals that appear to open out of nowhere. And either these craft go through the portals and then the portals close, or they've even seen tall, dark creatures, humanoid creatures, go in and out of the portals. And when I say they, I'm talking about the PhD researchers who are on assignment there. And then we have to stop and think about, well, are there parallel worlds much like ours? And these just happen to be veils or portals in between them. The interesting thing is, as you and I have discussed, is that some of the military security people that were posted at Skinwalker Ranch found that as they would return to their homes, some on the East Coast, some of these phenomena would follow them there, what we call the Hitchhiker Effect, and would begin to affect their family. They would begin to have poltergeist-type experiences in their own homes, and these are people who don't believe in poltergeists. And not only in their own homes, but then they found it would start to spread to their neighbors' homes and throughout the neighborhoods like a virus. And that really makes you stop and look at these data points and say, well, what's going on here? It doesn't seem to be nuts and bolts craft either coming from other planets or through some kind of a Stargate system to visit with us. It appears to be something different, something more spiritual.
Yes, and I totally agree, because I've always tried to wonder whether or not the appearance of the so-called vessel that comes in, people call it UFO, UAP, somehow distorts or rips a hole in space-time and allows this other residue of chaotic dimensions to come in. And just going back also, James, very interesting here, one of the things that fascinates me is that a lot of children also report, these strange beings, having nightmares and they're coming in. And I think that, within the annals of ufology, when someone gets to roughly about the age of 50 or just past that, the phenomena seems to kind of die down. And I wonder whether or not that these beings are, they get us when we're in the prime of our life, and that they still carry on their modus operandi. And you mentioned bodies. Now that again puts another chill up my spine, because I think I know where you're coming from in regards of your thoughts of what these things want. So that is very interesting, James.
Well, I've read some of the Whitley Strieber books, and of course there are many things you can glean from all of the literature and all of the accounts of everyone who's had encounters, because they all get a piece of the message. But something Whitley Strieber said was he was being led down a hallway by a couple of beings. One was a little blue one with a weird shape and a weird face.
Yes.
And there were many drawers along the corridor he was walking down, and they stopped. And they opened up one of these drawers, which kind of reminds me of like a medical examiner's set of drawers on the wall that you see in television and movies. They opened up one of these drawers, and within the drawer was a body that looked just like one of them, one of these little blue creatures. And it was wrapped in something that appeared to be a cellophane. And the creature opened the drawer, and he looked very pleased, showing this inanimate body to Whitley Strieber, and he said he even presented it with a flourish. And he said whatever it was, these beings were very proud of what was going on there. And it is just one more box that I check. It's like Mars needs women. Remember that? it's like aliens need bodies. So the question is, why do they need bodies? Well, why is that always the central focus of these beings that present themselves to us? Either they need to get inside of somebody else's body, trance channeling, mediumship, which so many people make themselves easily available for these days, and they think they're doing a great service to humanity and to the intergalactic, federation, whatever it might be. There's all of this possession of human bodies by these other beings, and then there's this, they come up with these biomechanical bodies, as we describe the small grays at times. They appear to be biomechanical in nature, and so we're trying to figure out what's that about. And then we find the hybrid breeding programs. Well, why do you need a hybrid between an alien and a human? What good does that do anybody? I don't believe that. And always, the discussion always comes down to they need bodies. And again, there's only one kind of interdimensional being that I'm aware of that has no body, and that's the third of the hosts of heaven that were cast down to earth and didn't receive bodies as we now have.
We have great respect for Whitley Strieber. I remember when his Communion came out, that was very, very traumatic, quite frightening, especially the image of one of them on the cover of his book. We had the hardback, didn't we, Philip? Yes, we do love that gentleman very much. He's a very, very smart man. But this phenomena even goes back to the past. I mean, when we were researching into the supernatural, you find stories of John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I's astronomer and advisor. And one thing that's disturbing about him was they became so obsessed with mirror gazing. I believe that's what they were doing with a friend of his, a colleague, that they wrapped their lives into this near the end, and they turned out to be absolutely nasty spirits. They were deceived themselves. You know, they were brainwashed into doing some horrible things advised by these apparent angels or whatever they assume them to be, but they turned out to be quite demonic, didn't they? I mean, and we go back to Adolf Hitler as well, who we find out afterwards through his reign of horror that they actually, it didn't surprise us to find out that they also were tampering with the supernatural, and that didn't surprise us at all. You know, you get these despots, these tyrannical leaders who will push for any measure to gain power and status. And it's so sad to think that people themselves can stoop so low to actually command the presence of these supernatural beings to gain some measure of success.
And isn't it very interesting how we go from a nuts and bolts craft flying out of the sky and wondering if it's going to land on the White House lawn to selling one's soul to the devil, all in the same sentence. But the phenomenon presents itself in that way. I mean, all we're doing is standing back and looking at it and saying, what do we see here? You know, what are you showing us? And this is what it's showing us. It's showing us, we've come up with this term interdimensional or dimensional beings and these portals. But to me, there are only a few good candidates for what that could be. I don't understand how a creature like us, living on what I call a fourth dimensional existence, which is 3 dimensions inflated by time, so I call it fourth dimensional, are these fourth dimensional beings that just live at different vibrational levels, and they have to change their vibrational level to come into our plane of existence? Or is there a much greater difference between our plane of existence and another from which these are coming? And if so, how do they live here? How do they breathe? How do they hold themselves together for very long if they're in a foreign environment? It's just hard to fathom that those are the real answers. Yet, for millennia, ever since the beginning of time, God has been telling us, yes, there are these other beings. Yes, they are enemies of humanity, and yes, you better be careful of them because they're out to destroy you. And so I tend to think that many of these encounters tend to be those beings.
Yeah, and we can see a lot of that happening even in our modern day, because, you know, this whole theme of possession appears to be very much what's going on, because you get good people that, you know, go forward into powerful positions, whether it be government or military, and then all of a sudden, whether or not they're influenced by their masters who are nameless and faceless, are not known, they suddenly become changed. And it's a bit, I've always likened the idea to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that film, that terrible film where, you know, everyone was being infected by this alien presence that was like possessing people, changing them. So we hear a lot about this, but I actually believe that. So do you believe that is something that's continuing like right now today, James?
Yes, I do. Now, what's interesting is that just generally stepping back and looking at the reports that are coming in, there seems to be a feeling that the abduction scenario, which was so prevalent in the 80s and 90s and onward, has begun to taper off, that we're hearing fewer and fewer reports of abductions. I don't know if it's true, but that seems to be the general feeling about it. Now, there are a number of reasons that could be true. But I am just thinking, well, we are kind of moving on to a different phase. I mean, as you know, and as you've said, you know, the government report of June 25th and just came out and said, yes, there are things in our sky that we don't understand what they are. We studied 144 of them. We came up with an explanation for one, leaving 143, which defy all earthly explanation, literally. So I think that there's a sea change, and I think that as we march farther into these latter-day times, I think that we're going to see that the phenomenon presents itself more openly, yet still deceptively. I've shared with you after my first book came out nearly 30 years ago, one of the women leaders of the church had a young couple in her congregation who was deeply troubled by some experiences they were having. So she sent them to me at my office, my law office there in Salt Lake City. So I sat down with them for a few hours, and I wrote down their experiences as they shared them. And they are Steve and Dawn, D-A-W-N, Hess, H-E-S-S, Steve and Dawn Hess. And they came to me and they explained to me what had been going on. And since then, I published their story in another book that I wrote. And then I saw back in 2016, they were on a program called Paranormal Witness. That's, what is that, 12th episode? Let me look. I have it written down here. Of season 5. It aired on October 19th, 2016. So you can see their story on the internet if you want to look at it.
Yes.
Well, the way they explained it to me was they were camping out in the Mojave Desert, and they were assailed by beings from a craft that had come down. And they were tortured in horrible ways, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. They were absolutely tortured. They made her relive a rape that she had endured early in her life. They made him think that he had been shot and skinned alive. I mean, it was horrible. And we saw that, we saw the parade of beings. We saw the angelic beings. We saw the small grays. We saw the little gnomes running around. So they were all there, all well represented. And so after this hellish night was over, they finally got out of the desert. They made it back to civilization. But as so often happens, they started having nighttime visitations by these same beings. And some of the same types of things would go on, but it was more of a mind game after that. They would be taken aboard ships. They would be examined. They would have stress inflicted on them to see how they did. Their environment would change and morph before their very eyes. And then their children started to be included in these as well. They had a little boy and a little girl. And they were fed lies like your little boy is going to be the spiritual leader of the world one day, and your little girl is going to be a great leader of her people. And so we're the ones who are sent to help them prepare for that. And finally, as you know, the man who was not a member of my church at the time, his wife was. She got him in to see their local bishop, and the bishop gave them blessings. He joined the church, and almost immediately, these phenomena stopped occurring in their lives. Their experiences stopped. And as of the time I talked to them a couple years later, they had not returned. So that tells me that as nuts and bolts and reality-based, as their initial experience appeared to be, even it had a lot of moments where it tended to slide into something else. And these beings, whatever they were completely evil in my mind in the way they tortured these poor people. They weren't just experimenting. They weren't just learning. They were torturing them. And the deception continued for a couple of years until they could get religious priesthood relief. That tells us a lot about the phenomenon as it presented itself to them.
Yes, and this is why your book is going to be so important, because I think it's a wonderful thing that, and thank God for the couple, receiving help eventually, because that is nothing to do with spacemen. That's demonic. It's monstrous, horrifying, disgraceful degradation. And I think your book is going to be absolutely smashing. And I'm so proud of you because you cover all this to try and educate us more into the problem that we're facing. And it is a problem. And one thing about the paper that they released, the Pentagon, regarding the UFO phenomena, I can't help but feel bitterness towards them, because they were, and I stated this again and again, they were aware, they were categorically aware this was occurring, but they denied it again and again. And it makes you think, doesn't it, James? It makes you think why they were denying it. Something perhaps tells me they might have had an idea of what was infiltrating us, and they kept it quiet, or they are working alongside it. That is a dreadful thought. I hope not. We can't tell. We can't tell. Well, we don't know.
I've expressed to you that I'm somewhat sympathetic to the government and to the military, who I think has a great deal of knowledge about what's going on and has had for at least 70 years. I think the problem is that they're powerless to do anything about it. And they know that it crosses from the nuts and bolts reality realm over into this interdimensional demonic realm. They know that, and they don't know what to say about it. So I think from their viewpoint, it's just a lot easier to deny that it exists, because the last thing they want to say to the world, our American government, the last thing it wants to say to the American people and your government and every other government, they just don't want to say, hey, look, we're powerless to protect you, because that's their only reason for existence. If they can't protect us, then what good are they? Why are we paying taxes? Why are we giving them authority over us? Who needs them if they can't do anything for us? And essentially, that's the message that they have to deliver. Yeah, these things are in our skies. Yeah, they appear to be doing some harm, and they don't seem to be friendly in many ways. But we're powerless to do anything about it. So, enjoy the movie.
Well, for me personally, it's a sting in the tail, really, because it's just leaving people to the mercy of what's going on and keeping research behind closed doors and not doing anything, or as you said, powerless to do anything. Yeah,
I think also I agree with you there, totally, James, because I think that when I mean the military establishment, or those in higher positions of command, are very much aware of what's going on. And, although we are, and I've written about this just recently, we're wanting disclosure. But I think that what's going to happen is that if we do acknowledge to the people that the UAP phenomena and alien phenomena is real, and everyone puts their hands up in applause, we then got a bigger problem in explaining how it is that these certain faction of beings are able to penetrate our dimension of reality, take people, away, perform these experiments, mess around with their mind, and then bring them back again. You're absolutely right. The military factions are not in control. Although I'm very angry with the establishments, because if they had been very open about this, going back to the mid-40s, then we may be in a very different place in terms of understanding what we're dealing with. But now it appears that if disclosure is to come, which I doubt very much at this moment in time, I think it's going to pose an even greater problem, and the public at large will have to be educated into a new sphere of understanding. So I think you're right. I think we've got a real problem on our hands.
And it's even bigger if, before that happens, that he rises in the guise of these spacemen.
Well, yes, that's
you see how to distinguish which one is genuine. This is where it gets more complicated.
What do you think about that, James?
Now, when you say he, to whom are you referring?
Lucifer, Satan.
Oh, well, we all have the same Bible that we read from. We see in the Revelation the events that we can expect. There was a great earthquake, and the sun was darkened, and the moon turned to blood. And then there's about 3 decades of horrible things that happen after that before the Lord Jesus Christ returns to the earth. I'm sorry to say, but I think we're getting close to those times. And yes, there will be the man of sin, there will be the Antichrist, and they will derive their power from Satan. And they will work miracles, and God will allow a great delusion in the last days. And I can't help but feel that to an extent, the UFO, UAP phenomenon will play into that. I think that the intergalactic Messiah coming from afar to offer consolation and peace and the Star Trek lifestyle, I think that will be very appealing to people who line up to have their heads chopped off.
I do suspect that myself. Well, we have suspected what kind of guys they'll take, and it will be, as you said, it must be wonderful. And of course, do you know what it reminds me of? That reminds me of, I read a book by Arthur C. Clarke, and I loved it so much I read it 3 times, and there was a miniseries, a brilliant miniseries that came out a fair few years ago called Childhood's End, when all these wonderful ships arrived over the earth, and there was contact, but they couldn't see what the aliens were. They kept themselves hidden. And it turns out when they actually do see them, they look exactly like the devil. So
I do recall seeing that on television, so I must have seen the miniseries.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was a wonderful take, a fascinating, and they performed miracles. They were salvations, angels, but they were really demonic, because eventually they saw to the destruction of the earth. So it reminds me of that. And the nasty thing about it was they were so damn nice.
Well, don't get me wrong. I'm not a fundamentalist, and I don't think everything is the devil that I don't understand. I just think, as I mentioned to you before, there are certain phenomena, and you can look at them and they start checking boxes, and you begin to say, well, it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it looks like a duck. I'm starting to fear that it might be a duck. And
yes.
And many of these encounters with beings that we don't understand appear to be demonic. They appear to check the demonic boxes much better than they would check the alien visitor boxes.
Yes.
And I just want people to be aware of that not everyone that says, hey, brother, or I'm an angel of light, come from the presence of God. I just want people to understand that there are deceptive beings that appear to have free access to us in our environment. And even though we tend to put experiencers, those who have had these encounters with these beings, we tend to put them out on the dark outskirts of society and of what we're willing to believe. Those things are kind of crashing down in on us now, and we need to stop and start to recognize that these aren't just crazy people talking anymore. These are people, neighbors, family members that have had real experiences with real beings, and we shouldn't just put them in the crazy line. We shouldn't delegate them or relegate them, I should say, to the outskirts, but we need to bring them inside and say, what can I do for you? Tell me what happened. How can we warn others what's going on? Because this appears to be real.
Yes. Yeah. And Dr. Carla Turner was another scientist who was, an abductee and went through a terrible time through her experiences and wrote several books about them. Unfortunately, the good doctor is no longer with us on this side of life. But I think it's really incredible that, you, James Thompson, have, put it out there. And your book, Worlds Without Number, is the one that, the public need to get. And, be open-minded about this subject matter. We have to look at all avenues. We have to open all doors to find, the truth of what's going on. So, where is this leading you, James? Where is your research now leading you? Have you got any more thoughts about writing any more books on UAPs or alien phenomena and that type of thing?
Well, every 30 years I come out with one. How does that sound? As I've told you before, I don't lecture on these subjects. I don't write prolifically on these subjects. I'm a full-time ghostwriter. I write the books of others, so that keeps me busy. Because of what I consider to be government disclosure, I believe that the government has disclosed the existence of craft in our skies that are not ours. They haven't told us much about what they are or where they come from, because I don't think they know that much about it, but I think they have disclosed. So for that reason, I decided to go back and add about 120 pages to my original book and then go through and rewrite the rest of it. Because if no one else is listening, I wanted the members of my church, which are approaching 17 million at this point, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I wanted to at least tell them it's all right to talk about these things openly. And if you're having problems with these things, go to your local bishop and get counsel and get priesthood protection. And that's my entire focus here, is just to educate people, to get them out of the dark shadows, and so that they don't have to, quiver in the dark corners any longer by themselves, being abused by these creatures, whatever they are, whatever their source is. So that's the only reason I write about this subject. I find it to be fascinating. I know that there are people with bigger brains than mine who are approaching it, and you'll find, if you read my book, that I don't shower you and pepper you with my conclusions. I just put the data out there and ask you what you think, because your brain is as good as mine.
So, we're coming to the end of the program now, James, and I've got to say that it has been a real education for me to hear you and your thoughts and talking about your new book, Worlds Without Number. Tell the listeners, James, how they can get hold of you.
Well, I have a personal professional website, jamesthompson.pro. And then I've set up a website that I can update readers of the book with the latest information. That is ufodisclosure.us. So if you want to contact me personally, jamesthompson.pro. If you want to learn more about the phenomenon or these phenomena as they are collectively, it's ufodisclosure.us. And I'd always be happy to speak with anyone or exchange emails or come on someone's program and share my information.
That is brilliant. We'll make sure that we put those on the attached the links for the listeners to find you. Well, James, it just leaves me to say thank you so much for coming on Twin Souls again. I've really enjoyed it. Some of what you said have sent that shiver up my spine and back down again. And, and I'll be thinking about that quite a lot. And we're going to have you on again very soon to see how you're doing. Is that all right, James?
It would be my extreme pleasure. I always enjoy speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely love talking to you too, James. It's a pleasure, and thank you so much for your kind time.
And it's a pleasure. So, there we are, James Thompson, Worlds Without Number. You can get the book, look for it and read it, because I think you'll be amazed. I can't wait to read it. It's just been released, so it'll be out very soon. And we wish you the best of luck with that, James.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you've been listening to Twin Souls and part of the Paranormal UK radio network. And please be safe, all of you out there. And from myself, thank you for listening to the show.